All right, so we have a 2004 Honda Element in here. Just did a starter on it a few days ago. And what's going on with it today? It's had a real annoying popping noise in the front. And anyway, it's mainly when you load and unload the suspension on the driver's side. So if you go around a turn, hit a bump, or that front left gets loaded in some way, you'll get a real annoying popping noise. And at first, it was kind of hard to tell where it was coming from. If it was the way I guess because this car is so boxy, the way that the noise generates through the body was kind of hard to pinpoint. Because a few times we thought, well, maybe it's coming from the rear. But the more I drove it, the more clear it came that it was the front driver's side. And here's what I found. On this car, the struts look relatively in good shape, like they might have been changed at some point. But whoever did it must not have changed the strut mount. I don't know if you can tell on this camera, but this bushing is completely broke away from the inside of the mount. So this strut is moving up and down and making a popping noise when you drive it. So this whole strut is moving inside of this mount up here, the mount and bearing. So I'm going to show you since the struts don't. I gotta jack it up and get in the air, but I'm pretty sure the struts don't look that old. They've been replaced before, so I'm not going to replace the struts. They're pretty expensive, and they've already been replaced once. I'm not going to go through the process of doing that. So I'm going to show you how to change just the strut mount on these, and go through the process of that. You'll need a spring compressor. Now I actually have a floor spring compressor, but I'm going to use the little hand tool spring compressors just to kind of show you that it can be done with the rental compressors. And my floor compressor is actually broke anyway. The pump on it is not acting right. So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way on the ground with a couple of spring compressors. Same thing you can rent at any auto parts store or buy. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and order those, and then we're going to get this up in the air and start taking it apart and get the strut out of there. And I'm going to go ahead and change both of them. This side doesn't look as bad. It might look wet to you on the camera because I already sprayed it. Yeah, this side is getting ready to go too. It's not in very good shape either. I don't know how well the camera's picking it up, but that bushing in there is pretty wore out. So anyway, we're going to do both sides and get rid of this popping noise that's in this thing. So I'm going to get it up in the air, order the parts, and then we'll go through the process of taking the strut out and getting those mounts out of there. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is get the brakes off and get them out of the way. You don't want them hanging down by the hose. So go ahead and take your calipers off. I just use these hooks from OTC. Normally you'd hook them to your coil spring, but since we're going to be pulling the coil spring out, I'll find a different place to hook them to. And I'm just going to hook it around the bracket itself. Now you have one, the hose goes to your strut here, so I'm going to take that off as well. Get that out of the way. So now your brake caliper should be hung out of the way and the hose is off the strut here. You got one bolt, 12 mil, holds that in. So the next thing I'm going to do real quick is take off the tie rod end. So I'm going to get my tool set up and then we'll go do that real quick. Alright, so go ahead and remove your cotter pin out of the tie rod end and then go ahead and take the nut off. 18 mil should be. And then get yourself a hammer, a sledge. And you should be able to hit it right here and that should pop it out. So just hit it right on the strut itself. That should be enough vibration to pop it out. Once you get that out, and the reason why you don't want to use a pickle fork or something like that is you don't want to damage these boots right here. So just be mindful of that. Since you're going to reuse this tie rod, it's better just to hit it right here. So now we're going to get into these bolts down here. See if I can get you over there. Alright, now we're going to go for the bolts here to hold the strut into the spindle here, the brake assembly, steering knuckle, whatever you want to call it. So on the bolt side, you got 19 mil, so get something to hold that. And you got 22 mil on the nut side. That bad boy was tight. I don't know. My gun might be turned down too a little bit. Yeah, I think my gun's turned down a little. So you got two of those. Tight. It's pretty rare this little gun can't get it off. Let's see. It's the highest setting, I think. So you can see those are pretty tight. Once you get that, then your whole assembly should be loose from it. So now all you have left is the 3 bolts up top. So we'll get those and then drop this out of here. Alright, so you have your 3 bolts up here, or nuts up here for the strut. Now keep in mind, if you took the bottom loose like we just did, once you get the last one out, this will fall down. So either have someone down there to catch it or reach around yourself and grab a hold of it. So anyway, we'll go ahead and take these out real quick. There's 3 of them. Now remember, this is the last one, so this will fall out if you're not careful. So I'm just going to reach around and grab it. And I got lucky the nut didn't fall. So I got to hold the strut now. I'm going to put it on the floor and kind of show you what's going on with it. Alright, so here's the strut. You can tell this strut's in pretty good shape. It's not real rusty. The spring still has some paint on it. I think this strut was replaced at some time. I don't think this is the factory strut. I don't see Honda anywhere on it. But you can see this strut mount is pretty rusty. Doesn't match the rest of the strut. So whoever changed it did not change the mount. So we're going to go ahead and get this off. Now this is, you got to be careful. You don't want to just pull this nut off, otherwise your spring will go flying. So you want to secure your spring with the spring compressor before you take this nut off. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. So I'm going to get my tools out and then we'll set it up. Alright, ideally to do this job you'd have one of these. This is a string sprut compressor that keeps you a lot safer than using the ones that are on the floor. But this one, the jack is busted on it, so, or the pump. So I'm going to go old school today and show you how to do it with the cheap ones you buy at the auto parts store. A little more dangerous. This is definitely safer to use one of these, but of course mine's broke. So we'll go use the old style hand tools and say a little prayer before we compress those things down. Alright, so I got these spring compressors set up. This spring is actually loose in here from the strut. I'm not going to take this off until the parts show up. I ordered them So, you know, the least amount of time that this is off and that this spring can, something happen with this on right now, this spring really can't go anywhere. But as soon as you pull this bearing off in the strut mount, this thing can shoot off if something would happen. So I'm going to leave this on until the parts show up. But this is kind of how you set them up. It's awkward because ideally you'd want this to be right here, but when it's compressed or when it's not compressed, you can't get it in there. So there's only 2 compressed on this side, and on this side I got 3 compressed, but you can see it's hitting the mount a little bit. So these things are, to say the least, a big pain in the butt to use. I mean, they do work, and I've used them for years. It's better if you have the machine or, you know, a standing one that's a lot safer and easier to use. But in a pinch, you can get by with these. The auto parts store sells these fairly cheap, or you can rent them. So anyway, this is set up. It's compressed. You want to compress it till the spring will move around inside the strut, and this one does. So, and then go ahead and spray this down, your strut down real good. If you're going to reuse your strut, go ahead and spray it down real good so that this nut comes off. Otherwise, you're going to have to hold the top of the strut and take it off with a open end or a box end until it gets to the point where it'll come off on its own. So I got this one soaking right now in hopes that it'll just pop off once the part gets here. The other thing too, if your struts are old or worn out, it's probably better just to get a loaded strut. A loaded strut means it comes with this, everything you see here already together. So if you would buy a loaded strut, you would get the strut, the spring, and the bearing and mount up here all together as one piece, assembled. So if you do something like that, say your struts are wore out, it's just go ahead and get the loaded, in my opinion. I mean, if you get the unloaded, you won't get the spring or the mount, and then you have to do this where you have to reuse your old spring and mount. So, all right, I don't know exactly where I left off. The auto parts store guys. Auto parts showed up. That's why I had to cut it off. But anyway, if possible, it's better if you're just changing the struts out on your car, you don't have a mount problem or something, it's probably better to get the loaded strut. It's more expensive, but you get everything new. Because you can see here, this strut's probably not that old, and the mount is bad already. And if you just buy the strut, you don't get new mounts. So whoever put the strut in probably should have put a mount in with it. But whatever, if you are cost conscious and want to try to get by, you can just get the strut, compress the spring, put new struts in. Usually when I do struts like this, I would do the entire loaded strut. The reason why I'm not doing it on this car is because, like I said, the strut looks pretty new or newer. And I think the struts for these loaded are about $250, $260. And the strut mounts are only about $35. So, you know, there's no point in spending the money when this already has. It looks like a newer. And this might have been, I was going to say this might have been loaded when they got it, but and the bearing went out, the bushing went out already, but I kind of doubt it. So anyway, enough of that. Once you get the spring compressed and it's loose inside the strut, go ahead and take your 17mm nut off. Just be careful, because if something would happen and the spring can shoot out. So make sure these are compressed good and they're stable before you do it. Believe me, you don't want one of these shooting across. I've had that happen a couple times, and it's not fun. I actually had one I thought was compressed on an older GM A-body, and just the spring itself, it wasn't a strut. They don't have struts on those years, but it actually wasn't compressed and almost got me in the face. So be very careful when you're doing this job. So anyway, we're going to, if we're lucky, we'll back this 17 off without using the open end with the impact, and then we'll get this bearing and bushing out of here and replace it. Alright, so you can see there, it came off pretty easy. Here's the old bushing. I got it soaked down. So anyway, we'll go ahead and put the new one on real quick. You can see the spring really didn't move or anything. Yeah, this bushing's all tore up in here. It's got a bunch. I got to put a bunch of grease on it, so it's hard to see. But there's chunks of rubber coming out of this, and it's definitely bad. So we'll go ahead and Put this new one on real quick. Make sure that your rubber stays on here, and then go ahead and line it back up. You have to center the strut a little bit. Get this seat back down in there. And then we'll start the nut. All right, I didn't notice it at first. You can go ahead and pop this out. The new one comes with a new one, so you can pop this one out and remove it with the other one, and then we'll go ahead and get this started. And I'll get the nut started, then I'll kind of show you what I'm doing. All right, so I got this on. You put the new bushing in and put the bearing and the mount on top. Start the nut. I got it stood up, and why I stand it up or stood it up is because it's kind of hard to show you while I'm standing it up, but you want to make sure that your coil spring goes back in its proper seat. So on these Hondas, this part of the coil spring, the end of it goes all the way up against this ledge here. You'll see it. And then make sure it's back where it's supposed to be on this side. So just make sure your coil spring is seated where it's supposed to be before you release these. Now there's no way the spring can get away now that this mount is on there and the nut. And once you get that tight, go ahead and you got everything lined up on the coil spring straight. Go ahead, you can start releasing these evenly, and the coil spring should seat back to where it was at, and then you're ready to put it back in. One thing I forgot to mention, I always put a nut on the inside one to kind of mark it to where they go, because these are kind of oblong and they only go in one way, and you don't want to put them in, well, they only go in one way, so I always mark this stud here and then orient the new one. Some of them have, like this one has a left and an arrow on it right here, but the new ones don't have that. So anyway, I just put this back up there the way it fits, and then I brought it back down, put a nut on the one that's on the inside. You can put it on any one as long as you know what orientation it is, and then set the new one on there and turn it till you get it to close to the same orientation. You can see here the strut is turned a little bit, so I'll have to turn the strut a little to get it lined up. But I got the strut up in there, and I got those nuts started on top, so I'm gonna go ahead and torque those down, and then we'll start putting this back together and move on to the next side. All right, the mount came with new nuts, so I went ahead and used it. Sometimes it can be challenging if you're by yourself to reach under there and pull the strut up. It can be somewhat heavy. And then get these studs started. I managed to do it, but sometimes it's easier to have someone else if you got someone close that can help start a couple of these nuts while you're holding it up. If not, you can do it. It's just so it can be a little bit more of a struggle. So anyway, I started all three of these and tightened them down. So now we'll move down to the bottom and start getting this thing back together. All right, sometimes it's easier to get a little jack under the control arm, which is what I did here, just to help me get this lined up. And it's a little bit jacked up a little bit too high, so I'm gonna let the jack down here. I just have a jack under the control arm to lift everything. Looks like I might still be a tad too high. Once you get the first one in, it's usually pretty easy after that. Just kind of wiggle it around a little, they should start. You get your 19 in your, I believe it was 22 socket. Go ahead and torque these down. Alright, let's get those torqued down. You can, lost a brake pad here, put that back on real quick. You can take your caliper off the hook and bring that back around. We'll hook that back up. Get the hook out of it. Find the bolts. Now these Hondas have that little plate that has to be a certain way, straight in there. Kind of helps hold it when you tighten it. Alright, make sure your plates are oriented right. They should slide in past the caliper. You kind of understand what I'm talking about when you're doing yours. It's this little plate right here. Caliper bolts into. They can be, if they're far away from the caliper, they're not set in there right. And we'll put that brake hose back on behind here. That's 12 millimeter too. That tight, brakes are tight. So really all you have left is your tie rod. See if I can get you up there. I believe that's 17 millimeter. I was wrong. 18 mil. Bring that up till it's a little tight. Line your hole up for your cotter pin, which I think it's pretty close. Probably should use a new cotter pin, but I'm getting low on them. This one's still fine. So anyway, that's it. I'll put the wheel back on, and that would be it for this job. You know, I don't know how many people are going to just change the strut mount, but if you're just changing the strut mount, that would be the way to do it. If you're changing the whole strut, it's basically the same job, except you won't be compressing the spring unless you're just getting struts and not getting a loaded strut. So that's pretty much it for a strut mount on a Honda Element or struts in general. It's pretty easy, straightforward job. Air tools help. Just be careful when you're using the spring compressors. Those can be dangerous. And other than that, it's a pretty straightforward, easy job. I'm going to do the other side, and then we'll button this thing back up, get this Hoopty back on the road. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you on the next one.